Hello, hello, hello! As many of you will have noticed, Keir Starmer has all of a sudden done a complete 180 on his stance on immigration. Many of you may be baffled as to why the man who has for so long now appeared as an unrestrained radically left-wing maniac has all of a sudden adopted one of the most right-wing talking points in public discourse. Watch this video to understand why Keir Starmer is now so rabidly anti-immigration, and to find out who is behind this shift in rhetoric. I'm sure it goes without saying that Keir Starmer is dismally unpopular, with some polls putting at -38 net popularity rating. Since they took office, this Labour government has had nothing but a string of unmitigated disasters, be that Southport, winter fuel payments, the Chagos Islands, a ban on smoking in pub gardens, and a war on farmers. For all of which I have a video you can watch here. Needless to say then, Keir Starmer is utterly despised, and frankly, he deserves to be. He is the worst leader this country has ever had, and everyone knows this. Also, he is perhaps the most illegitimate Prime Minister we've ever had. Despite having a massive majority in the House of Commons, Keir Starmer only managed to get, I believe, 38% of the votes. But actually, when you account for voter turnout, which was historically low, only 20% of those eligible to vote voted for Labour. Keir Starmer's government is part of the techno-globalist faction of the regime. With a Joe Biden or Kamala Harris presidency, this could have lasted. However, with Donald Trump coming in, there have been many rumblings from abroad about how despised Keir Starmer is. Many American political figures, including now Elon Musk, have not at all shied away from their criticism of Keir Starmer. With all this said, it's quite clear that regime approval is at an all-time low. Uncomfortably low for the regime. I dare say a supermajority of this country has very little faith in the regime. And we're even having petitions to Parliament to have another general election. This won't go anywhere, of course, but still the message has been received. Thus, evidently, a massive shift in policy was required to get the public back on side. And so this shift, a complete 180 on immigration, has arrived. Allow me to show you.
Because a failure on this scale isn't just bad luck, it isn't a global trend or taking your eye off the ball. No, this is a different order of failure. This happened by design, not accident. Policies were reformed deliberately to liberalise immigration. Brexit was used for that purpose, to turn Britain into a one-nation experiment in open borders.
Marked contrast to behaviour in the last 14 years. And she talks about immigration, record levels of immigration under the previous government, nearly 1 million. And she was the cheerleader. She was the one urging on the removal of the caps for work visas. She was thanking the previous Home Secretary for the work that was done. She championed it, she advocated it. Record numbers of immigration.
I mean, if you didn't know who Keir Starmer was, you'd think the guy's an utter legend. He is saying what many on our side have been saying for years, that mass immigration is uncontrollable, that this is not an accident, but an intentional policy designed for the great replacement of native Brits, and that it absolutely must be reduced. I mean, with this one move, Keir Starmer is outflanking the Tories, he utterly humiliated Kemi Badenoch in the Commons, and he's almost outflanking even Reform's rhetoric. But why the sudden change? Who is behind this? Well, ladies and gentlemen, as I see it, there can only be one man behind this. There is only one person in British politics who has such tact, such ability to be left yet appear moderately right. Such understanding of the nature of power and that power comes first, that the regime comes first, not ideology. This man is a Dark Lord. One man to rule them all, one man to find them, one man to bring them all and in the darkness bind them. Tony Blair is that one man. As much as I despise the man, you have to give the devil his due. Tony Blair is the most amazingly brilliant politician of our time. In fact, he's so good at appearing moderate and centrist whilst being far left that even many people I spoke to in Reform view him in a positive light. Cool Britannia, things can only get better. In so many ways, Tony Blair is a complete Machiavellian genius. And yet, of course, it was Blair who initially introduced the policy of mass immigration to rub the right nose in it. He of course also did this to prop up the pension system, which had become unsustainable due to low British fertility. And yet now I have every reason to believe that it is Tony Blair pulling the strings on this and telling Keir Starmer that he must shift his tone on immigration. You and I may call this hypocritical, but Tony Blair and Labour do not care. In fact, none of the established parties care about being hypocrites. Also, it must be said that Blairite mass immigration pales in comparison to Boris wave mass immigration. And so, what are the effects of this policy? Well, of course, many people will be confused by this move. Keir Starmer and his government have appeared rabidly left-wing for the entirety of their time in office. This now flies in the face of all that, and they appear rabidly right-wing. Of course, the left aren't going to abandon Labour. Where would they go? The Lib Dems? The Greens? I don't believe so. And so it's understood with this move that Labour can effectively outmaneuver the Tories, completely undermine their policy, and completely undermine their ability to recover from the last election. It'll be interesting to see how polls have shifted after this, but if this sort of stuff carries on, then I'd expect the next election to be potentially a four-horse race between Labour, the Lib Dems, the Tories, and Reform, potentially with no clear winners either. Frankly, the supposedly right-wing parties of this country have been totally inadequate in the strength of their rhetoric against immigration. The fact that Labour is able to shift in this way really exposes the inadequacy of right-wing parties. And again, this is a textbook Tony Blair move. I do wonder to what extent faith in the regime will manage to be restored. I presume a lot of people at this point are simply fed up with the system and will never go back to either Labour or the Tories. Too much damage may already have been done. However, I also suspect that a large part of the British electorate will continue to have very short memories, and come 2029 will vote again for one of the regime uni parties. It's funny, I remember watching an hour-and-a-half video by the YouTuber BritMonkey in which he detailed many of the problems with Great Britain. Though he had many great points, one of his points was that Brexit had one job to do to satisfy the British public, and that was to reduce immigration. Of course, with the Boris wave, we got the exact opposite of this, but I wonder to what extent it remains true. It does seem that there is a huge portion of the British public who will accept abject misery so long as immigration is reduced. And if Labour can be the ones to reduce immigration, which I suspect they can, then I suspect large swathes of working class people will flock back to Labour next election. And I know many people will be surprised by the idea that Labour can reduce migration, especially given how much the civil service pushed against the Rwanda plan, and the whole regime seems stacked in favour of mass immigration. Yet if I am right about Blair being behind this, then I suspect the civil service remains in Blair's pockets, and they will allow this issue to pass without much objection. At a time when Labour and Keir Starmer are utterly despised, they can, with this one policy, appear as the saviours of Britain by reducing immigration to net zero. And frankly, if you do subscribe to the idea that mass immigration is an intentional policy to destroy the demographics of Great Britain, then even if we had an absolute freeze on immigration, so much of that damage has already been done. I mean, just look at the fertility rate of the native Brits versus that of the many immigrant groups in this country. Native Brits are being completely outbred by domestic foreigners. And this is the genius of Tony Blair's evil plan. Blair, Starmer, Labour, whoever you want to say it is, can appear as moderates and can appear as saviours. Meanwhile, much of the demographic damage to this country has already been done and will only get worse due to fertility. The ground reality will not get any better. The standard of living of the average Brit will not get any better. Yet the Labour government can appear far less radical about things than they really are. Britain is still being destroyed, yet Labour get to look like the heroes. And so what do you think about this? Do you think Blair is behind this? I certainly don't see anyone else who would have the tact to do such a policy, yet I'd love to hear if you think someone else does and whom that might be. Otherwise, I hope you liked the video and I hope it made you think. Too many people in this country do not understand the true nature of power and politics in Britain. I hope I and others can do our part in changing that, because ultimately we cannot win until we understand our enemy, and Keir Starmer is our enemy. Anyway, thank you for watching. If you agree that Keir Starmer is our enemy, then please like, subscribe, and God save the King.